The image is green and white, and it is breathing. On a targeting laptop somewhere behind the Ukrainian line, a thermal feed holds steady over a patch of tree line. There is no color here, no shape a human eye would trust. There is only heat, and at the center of the frame, a faint, structured warmth that should not be there. A rectangle of stored sunlight would have bled away by now. This one has not. It is being fed. The operator does not move the drone. He watches the plume. For 90 seconds, nothing happens. Then the warmth at one end of the rectangle tightens, brightens, and begins to climb, a thin column rising into the cold air above the trees. To anyone else, it is noise. To the man at the laptop, it is a sentence in a language he has learned to read. The vehicle under the netting is not parked. It is waking up. And the only question that matters now is whether the people watching can finish reading the plume before the thing it belongs to rolls out of the frame. To understand why a single column of warm exhaust can decide the fate of an entire command crew, you first have to understand what the crew is sitting inside. The vehicle under that netting is almost certainly an MT-LBu, and across the Russian army that vehicle is less a weapon than a nervous system. This is the story of how heat, and heat alone, turned that nervous system inside out. The MT-LBu is not a tank. It carries no main gun, no thick frontal armor, no menace you could photograph. It is a lengthened 6-road wheel variant of the old Soviet MT-LB tracked carrier, stretched to make room for what actually matters: radios, antennas, map boards, generators, and the officers who use them. Under its boxy hull sits a Yams diesel, and on its roof, when it is working, sprouts a forest of whip and frame antennas. It is a battalion or regimental command post on tracks, a place where orders are written, where artillery is coordinated, where the war is, in a small and local sense, run, which is exactly why both armies hunt it. In modern war, the most valuable target is rarely the loudest one. A destroyed tank costs the enemy a tank. A destroyed command vehicle costs them coordination, the ability to mass fires, to react, to know what their own units are doing. By 2024 and into 2025, as the front lines around Pokrovsk, Avdiivka, and Kupiansk ground forward meter by meter, both sides had learned the same lesson: take out the node that thinks, and the limbs around it go numb for hours. The MT-LBu is one of those nodes. Russia knows it, so Russia hides it. Retention_checkpoint, stakes bend 4 o'clock. And here's the camouflage problem. The first wall every drone hunter runs into. The MT-LBu is small, low, and easy to bury. Crews dig it into a tree line, pull camouflage netting over the antennas, drape thermal blankets across the hole, and let the local vegetation grow back around it. To a normal daytime optical drone, the kind streaming color video over a frontline trench, it simply disappears. Most people assume that finding a target is the hard part of a strike. The evidence tells a different story. By this stage of the war, finding the rough patch of ground was often easy. Confirming that the box under the net was the command vehicle and not an empty decoy or a burned-out Hulk was where operations died. 3 days of optical surveillance of a suspected command position, in one pattern repeatedly described by Ukrainian drone units, could end with exactly nothing: a square of netting that never moved, never resolved, and never confirmed itself as anything at all. So the hunters changed instruments. They stopped trying to read shape and started reading temperature. I've spent a long time going through the way these feeds are described and analyzed by the OSINT community, and one detail kept nagging me. The drone operators who became good at this didn't talk about what the target looked like. They talked about what it felt like: cold, warm, waking, dying. They had stopped thinking like photographers and started thinking like the camera itself. A thermal imager doesn't see a vehicle. It sees the difference between one patch of the world and another, measured in fractions of a degree. And a diesel engine, even a well-hidden one, is a furnace that cannot lie. This is the core of the whole investigation, so it's worth slowing down. A thermal camera, a forward-looking infrared sensor, a flea eye, translates heat into brightness. Hotter is brighter, cooler is darker, or the palette is inverted. Either way, what the operator sees is an energy map of the ground below. Camouflage netting defeats the human eye and the optical lens because it breaks up shape and color. But netting is thin. It does almost nothing to stop the long-wave infrared radiation pouring off a hot engine block. You can hide what a vehicle looks like. You cannot easily hide what a vehicle costs in calories. And a command vehicle, unlike a parked tank, runs hot for a living. The radios need power. The map displays need power. The crew on a freezing night near the front needs the engine or an auxiliary unit to charge batteries and push warmth into the compartment. That requirement is the trap. The very thing that makes the MT-LBu valuable. That it is always working, always listening, always feeding the network, is the thing that keeps it warm when everything around it has gone to the temperature of the soil. Which raised a question that pushed the analysis from passive observation into something more like targeting. The thing that stuck with the analysts wasn't simply that the vehicle was warm, it was that warmth has grammar. A heat signature is not a yes or no answer, it is a tense. It tells you not just that the engine exists, but what the engine is about to do. Retention_checkpoint, microfinal approximately 7 min. The targeting cell had found their method. They could read heat through the net. The case for the strike was almost built. What they didn't fully appreciate yet was that the same plume that would betray the vehicle could also lie to them, and that a single misread of the grammar of heat could send a precision munition into empty earth while the command crew drove calmly away in the dark. Because reading the engine states is harder than it sounds, and getting it wrong is expensive. Consider the 4 conditions an analyst has to tell apart, all from the same green and white smear of warmth. A truly cold engine is the easy case. It reads at ground temperature, indistinguishable from the dirt. If the box under the net is cold, the crew is gone, or the vehicle is dead, and a strike there is wasted ordnance. The hard cases all live in the warm zone. There is the recently shut down engine, a vehicle that arrived, parked, and switched off perhaps 20 minutes ago. Its block still glows, but the glow is diffuse and fading, with no rising plume, the heat leaking outward and softening at the edges like a coal pulled from a fire. There is the idling engine, or more often an auxiliary power unit running while the main engine sleeps, a tight, persistent, localized bloom that does not grow and does not shrink, the signature of a vehicle that is staying put and feeding its radios for the long haul. And then there is the 4th state, the one the operator at the laptop was watching for, the engine warming for departure. That signature is unmistakable once you've seen it, a sharp, intensifying bloom at the exhaust, and above it a discrete column of hot gas climbing into colder air. A vehicle that is about to move tells you so, minutes before the tracks ever turn. Here is the part that doesn't make sense on the surface. You'd think the dangerous moment for a hidden command post is when it's running and active. It's the opposite. An idling, dug-in MT-LBu feeding its network is, paradoxically, the safest it ever is, because it isn't going anywhere and a strike can be planned at leisure against a stationary point. The lethal moment is the transition, the 90 seconds of warm-up before displacement, when the vehicle is committed to leaving but hasn't left, when it's about to break cover and become, for a few minutes, exactly the kind of moving target that artillery and loitering munitions are built to catch. The plume doesn't just locate the vehicle, it announces the one window in which the vehicle is both confirmed and vulnerable. But that distinction, recently shut down versus about to leave, is also where the method nearly broke. Both states are warm, both can show a block glowing under the net, in poor atmospheric conditions, with the drone fighting wind and the imager hunting for focus. The difference between a fading glow and a building bloom can be a matter of degrees and seconds. Get it backward, and you either strike a vehicle that left 20 minutes ago, or you wait politely while a live command crew warms up and rolls away. The whole edifice of thermal targeting rests on telling apart 2 smears of green. The thing that keeps coming back, looking at all of this, is how completely it inverts the older logic of camouflage. For a century, hiding a command post meant controlling its appearance, its shape, its silhouette, the antennas, the tracks in the mud, Thermal warfare made appearance almost irrelevant and put a premium on something no net can cover: behavior over time. The MT-LBu didn't get caught because someone saw it. It got caught because someone watched it long enough to read its intentions in its own waste heat. Retention_checkpoint, 50% mid-roll hook, KO portos. So how do you actually catch the warm-up? This is where the reconstruction, built from the kind of FLIR clips that circulate frame by frame through the OSINT community, gets specific. The feed in question runs 4 minutes and 38 seconds, and almost nothing dramatic happens in it. That is the point. Thermal hunting is not a montage, it is a stakeout. Here's the take that will probably get us some flack in the comments. The romance around frontline drones, the explosive top-down hit, the cinematic boom, has it almost exactly backward. The decisive work isn't the strike, it's the patience. The operator who reads a plume correctly and calls a stationary command vehicle is doing harder, more consequential work than the one who drops a grenade on a soldier in a trench, and that quiet, analytical labor gets none of the views. The skill that actually wins this kind of fight is the willingness to stare at a green rectangle for 4.5 minutes and trust what the heat is telling you. So put yourself in the operator's seat for a second. It's after midnight, the air temperature near freezing, your battery is bleeding minutes, your link to the drone is fragile, and the entire decision rests on whether one smudge of warmth is getting brighter or dimmer. What would you call? In the reconstruction, the first 90 seconds show the steady state, a tight, stable bloom at one end of the box, no plume, no growth. The analyst's read is an idling auxiliary unit, a command post settled in, feeding its radios. That is a confirmation of identity, not a trigger to strike. An empty hulk wouldn't hold that signature. Then, around the 2-minute mark, the grammar changes. The bloom doesn't fade, it sharpens. A second hotter point appears at the rear, and within 40 seconds a faint vertical column resolves above it, climbing and bending with the wind. That is the warm-up. The main engine has been started. The vehicle has gone, in the language of heat, from a statement to an intention, and then the feed shows the complication that nearly derailed the whole read. Roughly 30 meters from the main bloom, off to the flank, a second source of warmth flickers into the frame, fainter, lower, but unmistakably hot. For the analyst watching live, this is a problem with no good answer in the moment. Is it a second vehicle? A generator? A trick? Striking the wrong bloom means wasting the one window the warm-up just opened, and the longer the deliberation, the closer the real command vehicle gets to breaking cover and disappearing into the treeline road network where no plume can be isolated. The clock that the warm-up started is now running against the very ambiguity the second source created. Here the reconstruction shows the discipline that separates a guess from an assessment. The operator does not split his attention. He fixes on the structured bloom, the one with the rising column, the one whose shape matches a vehicle exhaust rather than a point heater, and treats the flanking source as a question for later, not a target for now. The grammar of the main plume is doing what good intelligence does. It is narrowing the decision to one defensible call. The warm-up signature, the engine plume climbing, the persistence of the structured shape, these line up into a single conclusion. The box under the net is the command vehicle. It is live, and it is about to move. What happens after that, in this category of engagement, is not the interesting part, and we are not going to dwell on it. These are military command vehicles, the legitimate object of military operations, and the gravity belongs to the work, not the spectacle. The relevant fact for this investigation is narrower and colder. The strike, where it lands in the window the plume identified, not in the empty patch a misread would have produced. The heat named the move named the moment. The moment was used. Retention_checkpoint. Microfinal tilde mid-back TAF. The plume had been read. The vehicle's intention had been confirmed. But the feed still held one unanswered question, that second fainter bloom 30 meters out, and the explanation for it would turn out to say more about the future of this war than the main target ever did. In the forensic aftermath, that flanking heat source is what the OSINT community would spend the most time arguing about. The leading explanation, consistent with documented Russian countermeasures, is that it was not a vehicle at all. It was a decoy heat source, a deliberately deployed thermal emitter, a small heater or burning element placed to bloom on infrared and pull a hunting drone's attention and its munition toward empty ground. That's the delayed reveal the earlier ambiguity was hiding. The Russians weren't only trying to hide the MT-LBu's heat, they were trying to manufacture competing heat, to turn the analyst's own instrument against him. The plume that betrayed the vehicle and the false bloom beside it were two halves of the same contest, concealment failing on one side, deception attempting to compensate on the other. That contest is now the real front. By 2025, captured and translated Russian field instructions, including guidance circulated through Russian military telegram channels and described in OSINT reporting, were emphasizing what the troops began calling thermal discipline, shutting engines whenever possible, running auxiliary units in disciplined cycles rather than continuously, parking under structures and earth that block infrared from above, draping multispectral thermal blankets, and yes, deploying decoy heaters to muddy the picture. That early mention of a Russian instruction on thermal discipline is the thread that ties the whole engagement together. The crew under the net had been told, in writing, exactly how to avoid this. The grammar of their own exhaust still gave them away, which answers the question from the start why a dug-in, supposedly hidden command vehicle was running its engine at all. The answer is that an MT-LBu cannot do its job cold. A command post that shuts down to stay invisible also goes deaf, blind, and mute. Its radios fall silent, its displays go dark, its crew freezes. The vehicle's function and its concealment are at war with each other, and on a cold night near the front, function usually wins. The warm-up plume in the reconstruction was almost certainly the crew obeying a different instruction to displace, to move before they could be fixed. They were following doctrine. The doctrine generated the exact signature the doctrine warns against. There is a line in the way these engagements get written up that reads almost like the war explaining itself. The same heat that keeps a command post alive is the heat that gets it found. You cannot run the network without the furnace, and you cannot hide the furnace from a sensor built to count calories. Russia did not lose this kind of vehicle because its camouflage was sloppy. It lost it because the physics of command and the physics of concealment point in opposite directions, and no amount of netting resolves that contradiction. So what does one exhaust plume actually tell us? Beyond the fate of a single-tracked box in a treeline, that the most decisive surface on the modern battlefield is no longer the one you can see. It is the thermal surface, the heat a unit cannot help producing simply by functioning. Tanks, command posts, generators, even troops huddled for warmth. All of them radiate. All of them are legible to a sensor that now costs a fraction of what it did a few years ago, mounted on drones that are everywhere. The MT-LBu in this reconstruction is one node out of thousands. The lesson scales. In a war this saturated with cheap thermal eyes, to operate is to emit, and to emit is to be read. If there's a piece of this we couldn't pin down on the available footage, it's the full back and forth over that decoy bloom, whether it was a purpose-built emitter or something more improvised. And that argument is still live in the analyst community. If you followed the thermal decoy debate or seen footage that resolves it, that's the kind of detail worth adding below. The picture gets sharper every time someone brings a new clip to the table. In the end, the engagement comes down to a simple inversion. We are trained to look for the shape, the silhouette of the vehicle, the antennas, the muzzle. The hunters in this war learn to ignore the shape entirely and read the temperature, because shape can be hidden and temperature, in the act of doing your job, cannot. A Russian crew can disguise what an MT-LBu looks like. They have never found a way to disguise that it is warm or what its warmth is about to do. The plume named the move before the tracks ever turned, and that quiet 4-minute and 38-second act of reading heat is, increasingly, what winning the close fight looks like. If you want to see how this same logic plays out on the water, where a different kind of heat and a different kind of seeker hunted some of the largest ships in the Black Sea, that investigation is the natural next step, and it's where this story of sensors and signatures opens all the way up.